it is my pleasure to ask the next moderator to gain the podium, Professor Hartung and Uitdehaag.
Good evening. My name is Peter Hartung. I have the pleasure of co-moderating this session with Bernhard Uitdehaag from Amsterdam. The session, after an initial discussion of the barriers and current limits in PROMS collection, use and implementation, is devoted to the issue of how to address the gaps in existing PROMS. Just a couple of words on my interest in MS research. I have a long-standing interest in translational neuroimmunology, particularly as it pertains to MS and related CNS disorders. And Bernhard?
Didn't expect that one. Well, I also have an interest in almost 35 years now in MS, and started all with Otto Hommes, as you all explained it at ECTRIMS, and also epidemiologist, very interested in outcome research and clinical outcomes and also patient-reported outcomes.
Thanks, Bernhard. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Giampaolo Brichetto from the Italian MS Society and Foundation, where he holds the position of Coordinator of Research and Rehabilitation, serves as Clinical Director of the MS Society Rehabilitation Centers, and is President of RIMS. Over the years, his research has aimed at improving neurorehabilitation strategies for MS by integrating traditional techniques with biotech devices. And he will talk about researching, developing, and validating new PROMS. Dr. Brichetto, please.
Thank you, moderators. I will summarize the activities and the strategy also of Working Group 1 within the PROMS initiative. I'm part of the Working Group 1 together with the other co-leaders and members. Bernhard is one of the co-leaders of Working Group 1. I will start with these slides that I grabbed from Paolo Zaratin's presentation on capturing diversity of people with MS experiential knowledge and making scientifically relevant, in particular for Working Group 1 core activities. We will see later how we are trying to build on MS experiential knowledge later. Working Group 1 overall aim is to move to a framework for development of new PROMs based on people with MS experience. Basically, Working Group 1 is working on the overall activities of identify which outcomes and functional domains matter most to people with MS. And in this context, we are moving forward with the two core activities. The first one is try to identify, together with a partner that is a CPAT, a roadmap for the qualification of PROMs by a regulatory agency. And in parallel, we are working on the activity of identify with different actions how we can validate new PROMs that can be used from research to healthcare system developed with people with MS in a proof of concept clinical trial. I would like to cite this draft guidance that has been developed by the FDA, in which PROMS initiative and also Working Group 1 contribute to some suggestions, let's say, that we sent to FDA that we see in the next slide. So I think that it is very relevant to know that also regulatory agencies are really focused on this topic. And in September, we sent a letter to the FDA with our comments on this guidance. And we underlined three aspects of the initiative, and in particular one aspect that is related of the preliminary work that we have done in the working group 1. The first one is one of the selling points, I would say, of the initiative, the participatory governance, in which we have the engagement coordination team that is part of the governance of the initiative. The second point that we have underlined in the letter is how we can take into account not only the functional domains, but also the interdependencies of functional domains. This is very relevant. It's a theme that emerged clearly from Working Group 1 activities and with the collaboration with the engagement coordination team. We hear in the previous presentation, in the previous discussion roundtable, the word fatigue. Fatigue is a domain that is strictly related and can influence the other domains. So understanding how we can measure also interdependencies could be crucial. And another theme that we have underlined in this letter was, in this response to FDA, the focus that we have on e-health in the working group initiative. We will have an update later, because the use of e-health could increase sensitivity on patient-reported outcomes in clinical trials. So this is our first activity, let's say, and we are working together with CPAT in order to understand how we can further increase the activities of PROMS together with CPAF in order to discover, say, a path moving forward, the possibility to use in drug development or research global PROMs that are validated for MS, also suitable for diagnosis, clinical practice, and regulate access to healthcare. So we had a preliminary meeting with CPAT in July, and then we will have another meeting in December in order to move forward with this aspect. The other activities of Working Group 1 is to develop a survey and Delphi that will be focused, will be multi-stakeholder, but the survey will be mostly focused on understanding from people with MS some aims that we will see later. What we have done until now, in the previous meetings, we have identified together with people with MS functional domains and a glossary, a definition of every functional domain. We identified 28 functional domains that are relevant for the engagement coordination team. Then we have worked with the working group and with the overall PROMS initiative to setting up a research team in which we have a dedicated methodologist, and we will also have an expert in equality, diversity, and inclusion that will be part of the research team. And now we are in this phase. We are finalizing the survey with the engagement coordination team. Then we will launch the survey in one language, in English, in a pilot, let's say, study in order to understand if the survey is feasible also. Then we will translate the survey in different languages in order to assure representativeness with the help also of the expert on equality, diversity, and inclusion. And then with the results of the survey, we will see later, we will develop the Delphi protocol and in order to arrive to a consensus on prioritization of functional domains. So the overall aim of the survey and of this protocol is to guide the identification of functional domains, to identify gaps and research needs, and to prioritize these domains with this multi-method, multi-phase study. These are examples of the survey questions that we will ask to our network of people with MS. It would be very relevant to be representative also in terms of disease curves of different ages. So this is something that we have still to discuss within Working Group 1 and with the ECT. And then we will, survey analysis will help in defining the questions for the Delphi study that will be focused on the survey, but also on identify the interdependencies, as I said before, among functional domains. We are really here. We had a meeting 1 week ago with the entire engagement coordination team in order to have their feedbacks on the survey questions, and then we are ready to develop the final survey and start with the pilot activities in order to understand feasibility of the survey. So thank you for the attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brichetto. I'd now like to briefly introduce our next speaker, Dr. Ludovico Pedullà, again from the Italian MS Society and Foundation. He also has an interest in neurorehabilitation, in particular studying the effects of neurorehab and physical activity on CNS functionality, on the processes of neural plasticity in multiple sclerosis. He's now a member of the scientific research area at the Italian MS Foundation, and he also is interested in patient engagement and participatory research. He will talk about the MyMood case study. Please.
Thank you for the kind introduction and to the possibility to present our work on MyMood case study. From recent multi-stakeholder initiatives, it has been emerged that patient-reported outcomes and their measures have not reached their full potential of delivering benefits to patients. This may be due to several reasons, which have a lot to deal with stakeholder engagement and in particular with patient engagement. Therefore, our goal were to research for functional domains that matter most to people with MS and identify those who need further investigation. We selected mood as an underserved domain and aimed to develop a new questionnaire using a model accounting for co-creation. We relied on the framework of Multi-Act, which is a project that most of you already know, which offered the guidelines for to conduct science with and of patient input. In particular, he proposed some recommendation to increase the value of stakeholder engagement, proposing some step where patient can be involved in the research project, in particular in the design and plan, in the conduction, evaluation and translation to community. As first action, we established an engagement coordination team, which is not a working group. This is the very important lesson that we learned, but it is a body in charge of represent each stakeholder, bring the voice of their community, and ensure representativeness of every actor involved in the research. The main phases of the project were the landscape analysis, where we try to identify the aspects of mood that matter the most to people with MS, and the item generation phase where we developed the questionnaire. We performed several actions since January 2020. In the first phase, the most important was the involvement of 17 people with MS who were asked to fill in a 10-day diary on mood. From these diaries, we gathered a wide range of mood expressions that were clustered by professional experts who identified 10 expressions of mood dysregulation and 6 resilience mechanisms driven directly from patient experience. In the item generation phase, we generated more than 200 items which were consolidated and validated by a community of people with MS. We generated the item from adapting those from existing scales and formulating new ones ex novo. One focus group has been conducted in order to consolidate domains, to add relevant items, and also to expand lexical expression towards the real experience of people with MS. The semi-final version of the questionnaire was validated by 234 people with MS who rated the item importance on a scale ranging from 1 to 5. So the final construct of the questionnaire included the domain of the unstable mood balance and several subdomains. It is worth noting that some lexical choices were changed after the focus groups in order to reach the expression used by people with MS. And another section included the resilience mechanisms with some different subdomains. In conclusion, the process has been time and resource demanding, but allowed to co-create a tool from people with MS to people with MS. And the next steps of the project will include the psychometric validation and the dissemination of the questionnaires. So let me thank Federico Bozzoli and Federica Molinari, who helped supported the engagement of the different stakeholders, the participants involved, and the engagement coordination team. And of course, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pedullà. The next contribution will be a pre-recorded talk by Dr. Tim Coetzee, who is the US National MS Society's Chief Advocacy Services and Science Officer. Amongst the many functions he holds, he's a member of the steering committee of the International Progressive MS Alliance, the International Advisory Committee on clinical trials in MS, and also serves on the executive committee of the Global PROMS Initiative. He will address the important issue of the regulatory authorities' perspective and actions. So I hope we will now see his recorded presentation.
I'd like to thank the organizers for the opportunity to join you virtually to provide some perspectives on the FDA and their regulatory actions related to PROs. These are my disclosures. In the next few minutes, I want to spend some time providing perspective on how the FDA is approaching the issue of PROMS in their regulatory guidance and work. Just this year, the FDA published a report, Advancing Regulatory Science at the FDA, where they discussed a number of issues related to their work in regulatory science. PROs were prominently featured in this report. The FDA stated that increasingly they look to patients to understand how they describe their health status because patients are the expert in their disease. This sentiment is clearly aligned with the work of the Global PROMS Initiative. The FDA went further in stating that input from patients about what is important can then be used to select or develop tools to measure what matters most to the patient. This thought is also completely aligned with the vision of what we are going for through the Global PROMS Initiative. In practice, the FDA has been issuing a series of guidance documents that lay out their thinking about clinical outcome assessments, including PROs. This work has been codified through the 21st Century Cures Act, which put in legal authority the requirement that the FDA develop a series of guidances that expressly incorporate the perspective of patients in drug development. This again was codified under the 21st Century Cures Act and triggered the development of at least 4 and likely more guidance documents. A recent one was called Patient-Focused Drug Development, Selecting and Developing or Modifying Fit-for-Purpose Clinical Outcome Assessments. This draft guidance, for which the Global PROMS Initiative commented, outlines a series of steps for selecting, developing, or even modifying clinical outcome assessments to include patient-reported outcomes. Now, within this document, there are some key points that we must consider in our work. The first one, which is clearly a statement of perspective from the Global PROMS Initiative, is that we must ensure representativeness from clinical trial all the way out to the healthcare system. And this theme cuts through the guidance document that the FDA has issued. And within that guidance document, they provide a very specific perspective that touches on the work of the Global PROMS Initiative. This figure illustrates their thinking about an approach for incorporating PROMS into clinical trial assessments as well as in the healthcare system. And you will see on the left of the chart that they outline a number of areas or health experiences relating from the disease condition. And they emphasize the importance of identifying a series of general concepts or a function, depending on whether or not it's a feeling or activity, and then developing a concept of interest that would be the indicator for the overall symptom burden or the function. And that this concept of interest would then be the foundation for development of a PRO in the case of a burden of disease, or a PRO in the case of a specific function, and that these would be translated into a scoring system that could be used to assess the severity or the function of the associated conceptual model. And that these measurement models would then be incorporated into use in trials as well as different healthcare settings. This approach lays out a very important conceptual framework that the Global PROMS Initiative could then leverage in our work. And the approach they outline here has a significant discipline that we can incorporate in our activities. Now, the key points from this effort are that the PROMS Initiative is in a very strong position to encourage the FDA and other regulatory agencies to enable a global collaboration effort towards validation and regulatory approval of a PROM for MS. This would be a signal moment for our community. And why is this so important? It's critical that we make this point with the FDA to ensure that sponsors are enabling science with and of patient input. The input of patients is critical in this, and the PROMS Initiative is in a strong position to facilitate and enable this. Another key point is that this global collaborative effort would create a framework for integration of new tools such as e-health in clinical trials and healthcare. The Global PROMS Initiative is well positioned to create such a framework, given the work we've been doing to understand e-health. All of this is vital in our pursuit of being able to incorporate PROMS in clinical trials and healthcare for the future. We must do so for the future of our patients, because our patients are the experts in the disease, and they expect us to be thinking about how we can incorporate PROMS into their effort. It's clear that the regulatory authorities are also thinking in this manner, and through the leadership of the PROMS initiative, we will be able to encourage the FDA and other regulatory authorities to incorporate PROMS into their regulatory decision-making going forward. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to hearing reports from the meeting.
Thank you very much. It's now my pleasure and honor to lead the questions and answer. There's one question online already, and that is for Giampaolo. I think there is the question, which languages will the survey be translated to, and how would you make sure that it will be standardized in all languages?
We are still discussing it because it's a crucial point, let's say. Also take into account the comment of Professor Comi before. we have to reach, the survey will be global, of course. So we will have to reach a representativeness of people with MS, also low-level income countries. So we plan to translate into 5 different languages the survey, but we are still discussing it. And of course, it's a balance between what we can do and what is ideal, let's say, because it's not possible to translate it in all the languages. So it's also a matter that we will discuss with our expert in equality, diversity, and inclusion. But of course, will be translated in Italian, in German, in Spanish, in French, in Arabic maybe, but we have also to understand from the ACT and from MSIF, which is our possibility to reach all the countries globally.
Thank you. Any questions from the floor? There will be, yes, please.
A question for the work of Ludovico Pedullà. Was there a reason that you were choosing mood as a first topic for this exercise? And secondly, to which extent did you compare the components that came out of the team, the engagement team, with existing pros?
Can you repeat the second question?
Yeah, the first was why mood. Was there a reason for that, like a gap identified? And then secondly, you made a really interesting exercise. Did it correspond with existing pros, with the content, or do you feel that it's really like that you identified a lot of new components to add for a new patient-reported outcome?
Okay, thank you. Mood was chosen from some multi-stakeholder initiatives, also coming from the Charcot Foundation network. It is a work coming from Federico Bozzoli, who is a person with MS who participated to some multi-stakeholder initiative and captured this need from his network. So this was the reason. And yes, we evaluated all the existing questionnaires. We took some items from existing ones, maybe adapting, but surprisingly, there were a lot of new needs coming from the patients that we involved in our focus groups, and at least the final version was is quite new. So I think we need to validate now from a psychometric point of view, but I think it will be something interesting.
Yes, please.
I have got one quite simple question, but how did you recruit the group of the people who was using MyMood? And my main question is, do these people have got any anxiety disorders or depression, or did they have got any, for example, SSRI drugs or something like this, or you excluded this group to have got a clear view? So it's...
Thank you for your question. We sent the questionnaire to a network, but we wanted to also include people who may not answer to a web invitation, as also today we discussed that some responders could belong to a certain category, but other may be excluded. So we also relied on our rehabilitation service and included some patients that were followed by the psychological support service in order to include also people with mood disorders.
Thank you. Gianpaolo.
I think that what Tim just told us is quite important because it opened the doors in a very appropriate way. We have the privilege to have with us also a representative of EMA here. I would like to ask if in EMA is there any ongoing or future initiative just to be aligned with the FDA?
Yes, thank you so much. So, yes, to my best knowledge, this is not an ongoing activity. I am aware that our guideline, that is not very updated, by the way, actually includes the recommendation of including PROMS in clinical trials, and it is true that most of the pharmaceutical companies actually comply with this recommendation. The guidelines, is just a reminder, are a frame, but they are not compulsory. So the company have not to do it, but they are mainly complying with this. It's true that I have actually checked that, for example, for oncology, there is a specific guideline for using PROMS in oncology. So I'm actually posed the question to our representatives to see, well, we have this for oncology, maybe it's time for us to actually work on a similar frame. I don't think we could be so specific to be for MS, but maybe having a frame for neurological conditions could be of use. If I can, I mean, hearing all of you today, I think it could be a good idea, actually, to send this message. So note it, and I pass the message. Thanks.
I think that is a major issue. And I think that what you just said is of utmost importance because I think that the neurological community is really looking forward for this step also in Europe, because I think what we are now doing is eventually what matters most for the patient, and that is eventually also, I think, what is the EMA's goal for the health choices they make.
Just a few notes that even if we work for a frame to have a guideline for PROMS, I think that still for having them as of course a secondary endpoint, we need some sort of official validation for the PROMS. So I think in parallel, it might be a good idea if there is a good proposal that is based on science and it has a complete package of validation, not only clinical, but other aspects that are also relevant, comes from a qualification. So it's there because we have all seen that we have seen other clinical trials that use some sort of PROMS. Actually, even if the results were statistically significant, the information could not be translated into a message to be put on in the broad information, just because it was not so clear that the scale was fully validated in terms that the effect side was clinical relevant. So there are two things that needs to be handled probably at the same time.
Yes, fully aware of that. Validation is crucial, I guess. Yes.
Yeah. I'd like to hear your perspective also on the suggestion of FDA to consider compositive measures, means, patient-reported outcome that can represent more than one functional domain.
Yes, but it is possible, but we actually prefer a little bit more specificity, and if it's possible to be disease-specific as well. You know better than me that not all the PROMs are at the same stage under the path for validation. So I think being some sort of specific is relevant.
Thank you.
Also, for if you want to claim for an improvement into a symptom, this is some sort of easier if you have something that targets one specific aspect, that if you cannot attribute the benefit on a single idea. I don't know if it's...
Thank you very much. And I think since we were skipping also the next coffee break, I think it's good to continue to the next session, and I want to thank all that have contributed to this very valuable discussion. Thank you very much.